It's Thursday morning. We must be in the Shoal Center for another weekly meeting of Sidney by the Sea Rotary Club. The best way, as I keep saying, I can imagine to start a Thursday morning. There are many reasons for that. The most important reason, actually, is the ability to work within the banner of Rotary to make fundamental changes in our community, however you define community. But there's another important reason. It has to do with the members of the club, who are universally great people to spend time with. Elizabeth May, leader of the Green Party of Canada, member of Parliament for this Saanich and the Islands, joined our club 10 years ago.
Oh, more than that. Before I got elected, so it must have been, I don't know, 17 years ago?
17 years ago. It seemed like only yesterday. And when she's in town, she is always at the club on a Thursday morning. Today, she asked to speak about, I would say, the underlying mechanics of climate change. And really a very interesting presentation, to say the least, and one that even those of us whose only experience with the weather is asking what it's going to be today, will reflect on for some time. Elizabeth, thank you again for speaking to us this morning, and thank you for your service to the nation, the community, and this club.
And yours too. I mean, one of the things about being the member of Parliament for Saanich Gulf Islands, and again, love Rotary, and I love being a member of Sidney by the Sea Rotary, but one of the things is that we have an extraordinary community. So I don't know how many of viewers know that I've been getting to know John Trelevin. When I first met John, he was at Peninsula Chamber of Commerce. But when I started realizing that his background included being Canada's ambassador to the Philippines and a huge role working in Japan and Canada trade, and really, if you want a brain to dive into and ask good questions about how do we diversify our trade and how do we develop new markets in places where we haven't had markets, John Trelevin is the go-to guy. So I'm very lucky that I'd almost say cheek by jowl here, but Anyway, so I asked to speak because it's been driving me a little bit crazy. I have a deep background in climate science, which nobody would really know just to know that I'm somebody who's a member of Parliament. But I explained this morning briefly that I was brought into Environment Canada in 1986. I was practicing law, and the Minister of Environment decided he needed someone in his political staff who actually had a deep background in environmental policy. And I explained that over the awkwardness of the fact that I wasn't a member of his party, but that he was very relieved to find that I wasn't a member of any other party either. So that was okay. And anyway, I started learning my climate science from the Environment Canada top scientists who were briefing the minister. So that started in 1986. And I played a role in some of the key climate policy development, but also I learned my climate science before the myth of doubt was invented. Because as with acid rain and as with ozone depletion and other issues, we back in the day, there's been some changes politically, and I don't mean in terms of partisan parties. I mean, there's been some changes in the relative role of transnational corporations and how much they can impact Canadian domestic policy. But back in the day, climate science was understood as something that was accepted and we had to act. And that was the era in which I got involved. So I wrote this book, Global Warming. Well, this is Climate Change for Dummies. The first version was Global Warming for Dummies. But the book is just one useful tool. So if someone watching this wanted to say, well, where do I pick up something that's authoritative and easy to read? You all know the Dummies books, and they, as somebody who's written for the Dummies publishers, John Wiley and Sons, they make you boil it down and make it a flipper ship exercise. So the kinds of stuff, like I was basically explaining this chart today, but I used a cardboard box and a pen. So what I wanted to—
We're a low budget club.
Yeah. What I wanted to do today, and I'll do it very briefly now, there's only one aspect of climate change that I wanted to explain. Just there's so much you could talk about. There's sea level rise, there's the interaction of water vapor and interaction of ocean currents, and there's what happens with drought, what happens with torrential rain, why is this all happening? I want to focus on the one thing that's happening in Canada right now, which is and they're connected. Why is it that we're blessed here on the Saanich Peninsula to have actually slightly cooler than normal temperatures through June and into July, versus Eastern Canada and down to the Eastern Seaboard, where the temperatures are sweltering to the point that people are dying? And what's going on in France? What's happening? So in North America, what I wanted to explain, and I'll do it really quickly, is that as I was growing up, whenever you looked at the weather map, so when I was growing up, the weather map was in black and white, so the TV screen was black and white, and the weather girl would always point to, or the weather guy, that there's the jet stream. It's going, it's really fast. It's moving horizontally. It's at mid latitudes. And what the scientists didn't see coming back in the 80s when I first started working on this issue was that as the Arctic ice melted, the waters of the Arctic were getting warmer and warmer and warmer, coming up warmer because the ocean's absorbing a lot of heat because of the increased warming of the atmosphere. All of this related to burning fossil fuels and loss of forest cover. So the warming of the Arctic Ocean has caused a collapse of something, well, a weakening of something called the albedo effect, ALBEDO. And the albedo effect was that as the North Pole, that the top of the, well, we say top relative to what, we're a ball floating in space. We think of it as the top. But at the North Pole is covered in ice. And as a result of that, that ice cover means that the heat of the sun, the radiated heat, bounces back to outer space. It doesn't warm the ice. And this is why we wear white clothes in summer. They're cooler because they bounce the heat off of you. If you want to stay warm, you wear a black coat because it helps keep you warm. So this is a positive feedback loop in scientific terms. As the ocean warmed, as the Arctic Ocean warms, it melts the ice, and that results in the faster melting of more ice, because the more you expose dark ocean water, that heat absorbs, and the heat absorbs into the dark ocean, speeding up the melting of more ice. That has led to a change in wind currents that used to whip around the North Pole, called the polar vortex. And that helped keep the cold at the North Pole, at the poles. And you've probably heard this in the news sometimes, weather will say, oh, we've got polar vortex collapsing, and cold air from the Arctic is now plunging down on us. We say, what the heck is happening? Oh, I thought we were supposed to be getting global warming and it's getting colder. Well, it's connected. The global warming is heating the ocean, which causes the albedo effect to weaken, which causes the polar vortex to collapse. So the cold air from the Arctic is pushed down on southern Canada, which is why sometimes we have colder temperatures in southern Canada than in the Yukon or in Nunavut. And people say, well, that's weird. It's all connected. It's all connected. So what started being noticeable as an impact and really causing loss of life, it was the first time I was really kind of riveted by it, was Superstorm Sandy in 2012. Because you remember the hurricane hit, and normally it would have gone back out to sea, but it didn't. It came back in and stayed put on top of New Jersey for long enough to do a lot of damage. What was happening was, and this has happened almost permanently now, that jet stream, fast at mid latitudes, became a long, wavy, loopy thing. And that's why Superstorm Sandy hit a wall and stayed where it was, because the jet stream had gone long, loopy, wavy. And it was scientists at Rutgers University who first posited that the reason the jet stream had stayed fast moving horizontal at mid latitudes was the temperature differential between the hot equator and the very cold Arctic. And that differential held the jet stream in fast movement, horizontal mid latitude. So as the polar vortex collapsed, and the Arctic warmed and the Arctic ice is melting, it caused a change in the air current patterns of the jet stream. And it sits for a long time. So what's happening, and what has been happening for a while since we started noticing this, and since the scientists explained what was going on, you get this long wavy line. The jet stream has gone loopy, and it will sit for a long time where it is. So on one side of the loopy bit, you can have high pressure zone, hot temperatures, and it doesn't move, and that traps the heat. And it's like a kettle. It's like putting a lid on a pot. It's not going anywhere. That's why we call it a heat dome. It's sitting there. So you've got the loopy jet stream, and on one side you can have hot, dry, and on the other side of the loop you can have cool. And the worst is when you've got on the other side of the loop constant rain. It just doesn't go away. And so all these things are connected to burning fossil fuels, not listening to the advice we got from scientists. I'm not saying it's too late or that we should despair, but it's important to understand how these things connect. And
well, Elizabeth, if I could just interrupt here for a second, this is fascinating. I feel like I'm in a classroom.
Sorry.
No, don't be sorry. This is amazing. I think now the politics of climate change. Okay, so this is the science of climate change. I understand it completely, and it's like, wow, how come we can't understand that? The politics of climate change being that I would suggest to you that 99 out of 100 people, when presented with, well, what is climate change? They go, well, you know what? It was a little cooler yesterday than I thought. So how can it be? How can it be warming?
Yeah.
And that is the extent to which most people interpret climate change. In fact, I wake up today and is it warmer or colder? And if it's cooler than it should be, well, there's no climate warming going on. And so it's so very essential that at some level there is an understanding of what it's almost like we should rebrand it and not call it climate change, because for most of us, climate is watching the news at 5 o'clock, telling us what the next 4 days are going to be like, right?
Well, if a scientist was here, they'd say there's a difference between climate and weather.
Oh,
Canadians love
right,
talking about the weather.
Yeah.
And usually can say, no matter where you live in Canada, wait a few minutes, it'll change. But weather and climate are very different things. And the climate systems don't change fast. So the changes that we're making now are way outside of the normal, like, geological timeframes.
Yes.
They're happening.
And most folks don't get that difference.
Well,
so well done for you to talk about it at Rotary and to create a book to help people understand.
And it's more serious than that, I think, because the politics of weather is one thing. The politics of climate change is a whole other order of magnitude. And most of us, as you said, John, wake up in the morning and say, what's the weather going to be today? Mm-hmm. Most of our political processes are, what's the politics of today?
Yeah.
Not the interconnectedness that you spoke so eloquently a couple of minutes ago and during the meeting. And as a virtually lifelong climate advocate, surely that's the political dynamic is you got to do what Rotary does. Look at the world as a whole. And your presentation was about the whole world is connected.
Yeah.
And I can't easily connect the politics of the whole
world.
The
politics of it has been, and also the manipulation of public opinion by very knowledgeable marketing and public opinion manipulators. So I do a very brief parallel to what happened with when we started realizing that smoking cigarettes caused lung cancer. And the cigarette industry was skillful in saying, oh, some people think that, but most people don't think that. My grandfather died of lung cancer from smoking cigarettes when I was quite small, and I became a virulent anti-smoking little kid who went around, and I got in trouble for taking cigarettes out of the purses of my mother's friends when they'd come for visits and blowing out matches when they'd be trying to smoke cigarettes. Because until the U.S. Surgeon General came out and said definitively smoking is causing lung cancer, the cigarette lobby was able to manipulate people into thinking doctors smoke cigarette. This is the brand doctors most prefers, this brand. I mean, it's pernicious how much the the big oil lobby, even though the internal memos show that for decades they've known that burning fossil fuels causes the release of massive amounts of greenhouse gas, which heats the atmosphere and will cause these effects. So they've known this. They've known this forever. So they've been in the business of trying to convince us that what they knew internally in like Esso, Imperial Oil, Exxon, they all knew this. And they spent a fortune trying to convince us that it's not true so they can keep continuing to be profitable for as long as possible. And there's a point at which the government should have been blowing the whistle on this. We started having that kind of reaction, as I said, back when I worked in the Minister of Environment's office. The Prime Minister was Brian Mulroney. But over in the UK, again, a right-wing Prime Minister, Margaret Thatcher, but she had a background in chemistry, and she didn't doubt for 1 minute. And she created a number of the UK academic institutions that study climate change. Brian Mulroney put in place a lot of policy changes that would help us fight climate change. And Chrétien continued down that road. It didn't become really political in Canada until Stephen Harper declared that the Kyoto Protocol was a socialist plot. So this left-right divide isn't helpful at all, and it's not based on science. And in my experience as someone working on this for a long time, it's kind of recent, and it's lamentable because we should be able to share evidence and then derive public policy based on the evidence.
Back in the 90s, I had a bit of hair, Elizabeth, a bit more than I have now, and I had a couple degrees out of UVic, but however, it became evident to me that the advent of something that we all call the internet was at some point might be used incorrectly. And so I proceeded to get a diploma in what they call computer information science and said to myself, I got to understand this internet because at some point it's going to be used for evil and I better understand it. Fast forward now 30 years and we're in that space where there is actually active climate misinformation and the tools to strengthen that by the day. There's a level of the way we interpret information that has nothing, unfortunately, to do with objective thinking and logical thinking and science.
The other side of this, John, is that look at how Rotary, to bring it back to Rotary, has been able to just about wipe out polio. Lots of people said nobody could do that. I can't imagine what it was like in the early days in Evanston, Illinois, of people saying, I think we can do this. But what it required was the idea, the science, but a lot of voices, starting with a few loud voices to get heard over the noise and to focus people's attention on one step at a time, we can achieve this goal. Elizabeth, you have been one of the most articulate voices and in this country, one of the loudest voices on this issue for a very long time. And when I first saw you was a CBC broadcast when Brian Mulroney was given a climate award, and you were the MC of that evening. And that was a very long, seems like only yesterday, but that was quite a long time ago.
It was actually in 2006.
So change also requires not just the facts, not just the faith. It requires the energy of leaders against whom there are many forces range. It doesn't matter what you're trying to achieve in life. And we had, of course, Gina Paisan speak to us about Galileo, 2 or 3 weeks ago in her wonderful film. Elizabeth, it's a privilege to know you. It's a privilege to have you in this club. And as a Canadian, I am so grateful for your voice and tireless energy on an issue which is as much global as it is local. Thank you so very much. And we wish you every success going forward.
Well, thanks. And the number one thing we have to remember as Canadians is that we can disagree without being disagreeable. So anyone watching this And if you want to get in touch, my constituency office in Sydney, the door is wide open. Come by. It may take a while to organize a face-to-face sit down, but conversations are essential, and being civil with each other is essential, and just being open to figuring out there are solutions and they can benefit our society, but we can't just go along, sort of dancing around the edge of a cliff without noticing. So it's time to pay attention to where our feet are going.
And as you know very well, climate change is one of the 7 pillars of Rotary. With Ray Anders and others in this club, yourself, of course, there's a strong effort underway to get the voices out. And thanks to John in Harvard Media and his skill, this video will be placed on a number of platforms. And it's just another way of you getting your voice out there and getting to the ears of people who need to listen.
I really appreciate it. Thank you both teamwork here of John Trelevin and John Rizek for the good of Rotary.
Absolutely.
Thank you. You bet. Take care, y'all.